The rain came sideways across the porch the night Eleanor Voss heard a knock. She had stopped waiting, for she was 81 years old, and for 19 years she had been told her son did not make it home. A folded flag sat in a glass case on the mantel. A telegram, brittle now, lived in a drawer she opened only on his birthday. So, when the porch light flickered and a man stood there in the wet dark with a dog at his side, her first thought was that grief had finally come to take the rest of her, too. The man did not speak right away. He stood with his shoulders square against the wind, water running off the brim of his cap, and the German shepherd beside him sat without being told. The dog did not bark. It looked at Eleanor through the screen door the way a person looks at someone they have been sent to find, and something in that steady gaze made the old woman's hand tighten on the doorframe. If this story stays with you, take a moment to follow along and stay until the end, because what this man carried to her door had waited 19 years to be said. Her name was Eleanor Voss, and she had lived in the same gray house on the edge of Harlan County for 53 years. The house sat where the foothills began to climb, where the road turned to gravel and then to mud when the season was wrong, and where the nearest neighbor was a half-mile of fence line away. Her husband had died of a bad heart 12 years back. Her son had left before that, gone into the Marine Corps at 19, with a duffel bag and a grin she could still see when she closed her eyes. His name was Daniel. He had been her only child. The man on the porch was tall and built like someone who had spent years carrying weight that other people set down. Late 30s, maybe 40, with a weathered face and a short crop of dark hair going gray at the temples. There was a faint scar along the left side of his jaw, pale against skin tanned by wind and sun. His eyes were the kind that never fully stopped moving, scanning the porch, the yard, the dark tree line, even as they returned to her face. He wore a rain shell over a plain shirt, and under it the straight back of a man who had stood at a lot of attention in his life. "Mrs. Voss," he said. His voice was low and careful. "My name is Marcus Hale. I served with your son." For a moment, Eleanor could not make her mouth work. The wind pushed rain against the screen, and the dog shifted its weight, and somewhere behind her, the old clock in the hall counted off seconds that suddenly felt very loud. "My son is dead," she said finally. The words came out flat, worn smooth from 19 years of saying them. "They told me a long time ago." "I know what they told you," Marcus said. "That's why I'm here." She should have closed the door. A stranger in the rain. A story she had buried so deep that digging it up felt like a kind of violence, an offer of hope that at her age could only end one way. She had learned the hard way that hope was the cruelest thing a person could be handed, and yet she did not close the door. The dog had something to do with it. The dog watched her with such patient certainty, ears up, body still, that she found herself stepping back and pulling the door wide. "You'd better come out of the rain," she said. Marcus wiped his boots a long time on the mat, the way men raised right still do, and the shepherd came in behind him and stood dripping on the worn floorboards. Eleanor looked at the dog properly now in the lamplight. He was a big animal, tan and black across the back with a dark mask over his muzzle, his coat soaked into spikes along his spine. One ear had a small notch torn from the top. His eyes were dark and quiet, and far older than a dog's eyes had any right to be. "What's his name?" she asked, because it was easier than asking the other thing. "Ranger," Marcus said. "He was your son's dog over there." The word over there did something to the room. Eleanor lowered herself into the chair by the cold stove, and her hands found her lap and folded there, and she looked at the dog, who had belonged to her boy. "Daniel never wrote about a dog," she said. "He couldn't write about a lot of things," Marcus said. He stayed standing, cap in his hands now, turning it slowly. The work he did, most of it didn't go in letters. Outside, the rain kept on. Inside, an old woman and a Marine looked at each other across 19 years, and the dog lay down between them on the cold floor, as if to say that whatever came next, none of them were going to face it alone. Marcus had rehearsed this 100 times on the drive-up, and now that he stood in the small warm kitchen, none of the rehearsed words would come. He had served 11 years and seen things he would never describe to a living soul. And yet the hardest thing he had ever done was stand in this house and decide where to begin. He set his cap on the table. He asked if he could sit. Eleanor nodded toward the chair across from her, and Ranger lifted his head to watch him lower himself into it, then set his chin back down on his paws. "I'm going to tell you something," Marcus said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you decide what to do with it. Can you do that?" Eleanor's chin lifted a fraction. There was steel in this woman under the soft white hair. He could see it. The kind of steel that comes from burying a husband and a son and a whole way of life and getting up the next morning to feed the chickens anyway. "I have been hearing hard things since before you were born, young man," she said. "Say what you came to say," so he told her. He told her that Daniel had not died the way the telegram said. The telegram had said a vehicle accident during a training rotation overseas, remains not recoverable, deepest sympathies of a grateful nation. That was the story. It was a clean story, the kind that closes a file. The truth was longer and uglier, and it had taken Marcus 19 years and a dying man's confession to put together, and he laid it out for her piece by piece in that quiet kitchen while the rain ran down the windows. Daniel had been part of a small unit doing work that did not officially exist. There had been a man in their chain, a contractor named Royce Tillman, who handled logistics and supply, and a great many things that moved through the unit's hands. Money, mostly. Equipment that was supposed to go one place and went another. Daniel, Marcus said, had been the one who noticed. He had been young and stubborn and raised by a woman who taught him that stealing was stealing no matter how big the numbers got, and he had started writing things down. Eleanor's hand had gone to her throat. "My boy found out somebody was stealing. Your boy found out a lot of people were stealing," Marcus said, and he was getting ready to take it up the line. The rest of it Marcus delivered slowly, watching her face, ready to stop if she needed him to. Daniel had gone out on what was logged as a routine movement. The vehicle he was in left the wire and did not come back. The official finding was an accident. But the man who had arranged that movement was Royce Tillman, and the records Daniel had been keeping vanished the same week, and the two other men who could have corroborated what Daniel knew were rotated out and scattered to 3 different commands within a month. "You're telling me somebody killed my son," Eleanor said. Her voice did not break. It went very quiet and very even, which was worse. "I'm telling you I believe that," Marcus said. "And I'm telling you I spent the last 2 years finding the proof, because believing isn't enough, not for what I'm about to ask you to help me do." Ranger rose from the floor, then crossed the small space, and laid his big head in Eleanor's lap. The old woman's hands came down into the dog's fur as if they had been waiting 19 years for something to hold, and for the first time since the knock at the door, her composure cracked, and 2 tears ran down the lines of her face and fell into the dog's coat. It is easy sometimes to believe that the people who hurt us are gone, that time has carried them out of reach. Stay with this story, because the man who built his life on a lie about Daniel Voss was not gone. He was closer than anyone knew, and he had spent 19 years making very sure no one ever came knocking. What he did not count on was a dog who remembered, and a mother who had never once stopped waiting. Marcus did not sleep that night. Eleanor put him in the spare room that had been Daniel's, though she did not say so, and he lay awake on the narrow bed under a shelf of dusty trophies and a faded poster of a baseball team, and he listened to the rain ease off toward morning. Ranger lay across the doorway, not in the room and not out of it. The way the dog had slept for as long as Marcus had known him, some habits a working dog never loses. Keeping the door was one of them. In the morning, the sky came up, washed and pale, and Eleanor made coffee in a percolator older than Marcus, and over the table she asked the question he had been dreading. "Why now?" she said. "Why, after all these years?" So he told her about the man who died. His name had been Samuel Okafor, and he had been one of the 2 men rotated out, one of the men who could have backed up Daniel's story. Samuel had carried it for 19 years the way a man carries a stone. He is ashamed he ever picked up. He had been afraid back then, afraid for his own family, and he had stayed quiet and let the clean story stand. Then the cancer came, and a man with months to live stops being afraid of the things that used to frighten him. Samuel had found Marcus through the long, slow network of men who had served together, and he had asked Marcus to come, and across a hospice bed, he had told him everything. "He gave me names," Marcus said, "dates. He gave me where to look. And he gave me Ranger, because Ranger had been kept by another man in the unit all these years, an old quartermaster named Briggs, who couldn't bring himself to put the dog down, and couldn't bring himself to bring him home either. Samuel's last words to me were, 'Your son's mother is still alive in Kentucky, and she thinks her boy died in a wreck. He could not stand to leave the world with that lie still standing.' So he handed it to me." Eleanor was quiet for a long while. The coffee steamed between them. Out in the yard, a rooster complained about something and went silent. "And the man," she said, "Tillman, where is he?" This was the part Marcus had turned over in his mind 1,000 times because there was no soft way to say it. "He's an hour from here," he said. "He runs a company now, Sumter Ridge Holdings. They buy up land, mostly distressed property, farms that went under. He's got a house on the lake and a name people around here respect. He goes to church, he gives to the food bank." Marcus paused. "And about 3 years ago, Mrs. I.L. Voss, his company started buying property in this county, including, I believe, the note on this house." Eleanor set down her cup. "I own this house," she said, "free and clear, have for 30 years. "I'd like to look at your papers," Marcus said gently. "If you'll let me, because I pulled the county records before I came, and there's a lien filed against this property that you may not know about." The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. This one had a floor dropping out of it. The 2 of them spent that morning at the kitchen table with a metal box of documents Eleanor had kept since her husband died, and the picture that came together was not a coincidence, and it was not bad luck. 3 years back, Eleanor had taken a small loan against the house to cover a winter of medical bills, the kind of arrangement a local outfit had offered her, with a friendly handshake and a stack of papers she had trusted because the man across the desk reminded her of her late husband. That local outfit had been bought, and bought again, and the paper on Eleanor's loan had traveled up a chain of holding companies until it landed in the portfolio of Sumter Ridge. The terms had quietly changed along the way. There were fees she had never agreed to. There was a balloon payment she had never understood. And there was, Marcus showed her a clause that allowed the holder of the note to begin foreclosure proceedings on terms that bordered on predatory. "He bought the lie about your son," Marcus said quietly. "And now he's trying to buy the ground your son grew up on. I don't think he even knows whose house it is. I think to him, it's just a parcel on a map. But that almost makes it worse." Eleanor stood and walked to the window. She was a small woman, stooped a little now with the years. But she stood at that window with her spine straight and her hands folded, looking out at the land her husband had farmed and her son had run across as a boy. And when she spoke, her voice was steady as stone. "Then we are not going to let him have it," she said, "either of them, my son's name or my husband's land." Ranger crossed to her side and pressed against her leg, and she put one hand down on his head, and Marcus Hale understood in that moment that he had not come to Kentucky to rescue an old woman. He had come to stand beside one. One travels slowly in a place like Harlan County, and then all at once it started with Dwight Pruitt, who ran the feed store down at the crossroads and had known Eleanor for 40 years. Marcus went in for dog food and a few supplies, and Dwight, who could read a stranger the way other men read weather, asked him flat out what business a Marine had staying at the Voss place. Marcus told him, a careful part of the truth, that he had served with Eleanor's son and come to pay respects and found the old woman in some trouble with her mortgage. Dwight's face changed at the word, Sumter Ridge. He set down the sack of feed and leaned on the counter. "They came for the Hadleys last spring," he said, "and the Combs place before that. Folks who'd been here 100 years, gone in a season, always legal. Always so legal you couldn't lay a hand on it." He looked at Marcus a long moment. "Eleanor know what she's up against?" "She's starting to." "Then she's not facing it alone," Dwight said. And that was the first of them. By the end of that week, there were others. There was Carla Mendez, who ran the diner on the square and had gone to school with Daniel, and who remembered him as the boy who shoveled the widow's walk every winter without being asked. She came up the gravel one evening with a foil pan, still warm in her hands, and set it on Eleanor's counter, and did not leave for 3 hours. And when she finally did, she had written down every parcel in the county she could remember changing hands in the last 5 years. There was Pastor Lyle Ferris, who had buried Eleanor's husband and would not stand by while a company tried to take the house out from under his widow. He was a thin, soft-spoken man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he sat at the table and went through the loan papers line by line, murmuring the numbers under his breath, and when he reached the balloon clause he took the glasses down and set them on the table and was quiet for a long moment. "I have signed a great many things in this life on a handshake," he said. "I did not know they had stopped meaning anything." There was a young woman named Becca Hadley, granddaughter of the family Sumter Ridge had already pushed out, who showed up at Eleanor's door one evening with a folder of her own grandfather's loan documents and a hard light in her eyes. "Whatever they did to you," she said, "they did to us first. I kept everything. I just never knew what to do with it." She was 26 and worked 2 jobs, and had watched her grandfather lose 90 acres in a single season, and she set the folder on the table the way a person sets down something they have carried too far. What none of them could do alone, they began to be able to do together. Marcus laid the papers out across Eleanor's kitchen table, and then across 2 more tables Dwight hauled over from the feed store in the bed of his truck, grunting up the porch steps with one under each arm, and the documents from the Hadley foreclosure, and the Voss lien. And a third set, that Carla turned up from a cousin who had lost a parcel 2 years back all began to line up the same fees, the same buried clauses, the same chain of holding companies tracing back, in every case, to the same lake house an hour up the road. They worked late into the nights that week, the kitchen warm and crowded, Carla keeping coffee coming and Becca reading figures aloud in a flat, clear voice while Marcus checked them against the timeline. Ranger lay under the table through all of it, shifting only when someone's chair scraped too close, a steady warm weight against their feet, and more than once Eleanor reached down without looking and found his head there. This was no longer one old woman's trouble. It was a pattern, and a pattern was a thing the law could be made to see. Marcus knew the difference between believing a thing and proving it. He had spent 2 years learning that difference in the matter of Daniel's death, and he applied it now to the matter of the land. He did not raise his voice, and he did not make threats, and he did not drive up to the lake house, though there were nights he wanted to. He gathered, he photographed every document. He built a timeline on butcher paper that ran the length of Eleanor's hallway, dates and dollar figures, and the names of shell companies. And he checked every figure twice because he had learned that a single wrong number could let a guilty man walk. Eleanor sat with him through the long evenings and corrected him when his arithmetic ran ahead of the facts, because her mind was sharp and her memory for what she had signed, and when was better than any record. "You'd have made a good Marine," he told her, once late, when the timeline was 3/4 built. "I raised one," she said. "That was enough work for one lifetime." The threat, when it came smiling, exactly as Marcus had known it would. A man in a clean gray suit drove up the gravel one afternoon in a black SUV that did not belong on that road, and he got out with a leather folder and a practiced warmth, and he introduced himself as a representative of Sumter Ridge Holdings, here to discuss Mrs. Sav. Voss's options. Ranger was on his feet before the man reached the porch steps, a low sound starting in his chest, his body between the stranger and the door. The dog did not like him. Eleanor had learned by now to trust that. "There's no need for the animal," the man said, still smiling. "He decides that," Eleanor said, "not you." The representative talked for 10 minutes in the soft, round language of men who steal with paperwork. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps because Ranger would not let him come higher, and he kept his eyes on the dog as he spoke, the smile never quite leaving, but the warmth in it thinning by degrees. He spoke of unfortunate circumstances and unavoidable obligations, and the company's sincere desire to find an amicable resolution. He used the word amicable 4 times. He laid out an offer, generous he called it, to purchase the property and spare Mrs. Voss the hardship of foreclosure, and he set a number on the table that was less than half what the land was worth, and he slid the folder forward across the porch rail as if he were doing her a kindness. He mentioned gently that these matters had a way of becoming difficult, that foreclosure was hard on a person at her age, that it would be a shame to let it come to that when a clean sale could spare her so much trouble. The word trouble sat in the cold air between them and did not pretend to be anything but what it was. Eleanor did not look at the folder. She looked at the man. "Tell Mr. Rouse, Tillman," she said, "that I knew a boy once who wrote down the things men like him did because his mother taught him that stealing is stealing. You tell him that boy's mother is not selling." The smile held, but something moved behind the man's eyes, a flicker of calculation, and Marcus, watching from the doorway, saw the exact moment the man understood that this was not going to be the easy parcel on the map he had been promised. He gathered his folder. He thanked Mrs. Voss for her time with a courtesy that had gone cold. And as he walked back to the SUV, Ranger followed him to the edge of the porch and stood there, silent now, watching, until the vehicle was gone down the gravel and out of sight. That night, the timeline was finished, and the next morning Marcus made a phone call he had been saving. There was a woman named Deputy Renata Cole in the county sheriff's office, and Marcus had not gone to her first, because in a place this size you do not know who owes what to whom until you have looked. He had looked. Renata Cole had grown up 2 counties over, had no ties to Sumter Ridge or its money, and had a reputation for being unable to leave a wrong thing alone. More than that, Becca Hadley had vouched for her, said the deputy had tried to help her family the year before and been blocked at every turn by paperwork that was always perfectly legal. Marcus drove the folder and the photograph timeline into town and laid it on Renata Cole's desk and watched her read it with a deepening line between her brows. "This is a lot," she said when she had finished. "It's enough to make somebody look," Marcus said. "That's all I'm asking. I'm not asking you to arrest anybody today. I'm asking you to open the door because once it's open, every family in this county that lost their land is going to walk through it." Deputy Cole was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled a legal pad toward her and uncapped a pen. "Tell me about the son," she said. "Start with the son, because if what you're telling me about the death is true, this stops being a county matter real fast." And so it began to move, the way these things move, slowly and then with a gathering weight. Renata Cole made calls to people Marcus could not reach. The financial pattern, documented across 4 families now, went to a state office that handled exactly this kind of predatory lending. And the matter of Daniel Voss, the matter that had brought a Marine and a dog to a gray house in the rain, went to a place Marcus had not been able to take it alone, because Samuel Okafor's deathbed account carried weight, but a dying man's words were not, by themselves, a case. They needed corroboration. They needed the records that had vanished 19 years ago. And those records, Marcus had come to believe, had not been destroyed at all. Here's the thing about a man like Royce Tillman. He was careful. He had been careful for 19 years. A careless man would have burned the evidence of what he did to Daniel Voss. But a careful man keeps it, because a careful man knows that the documents which can hang you are also the documents that can protect you if a partner turns, if a deal sours, if someone above you decides you are the loose end. Marcus had learned this from Samuel. Tillman kept things. Somewhere, Samuel had said, somewhere that man keeps a record of every dirty thing, because it is the only thing keeping him alive. The break came from the dog in the end, though not the way a person might expect. Ranger had belonged to Daniel and then to the quartermaster Briggs, and somewhere in those years the old man Briggs had kept more than the dog. When Marcus called him, the second call he had been saving, Briggs was an old voice on a bad line in a VA home 3 states away, and at first he would not talk. Then Marcus said Eleanor's name, said she was alive, said she was fighting Tillman for her land this very week, and the old man went silent. For so long, Marcus thought the line had dropped. "Daniel gave me an envelope," Briggs said finally. "Before that last movement said if anything happened to him, get it to somebody who'd know what to do. I never did. God forgive me. I never did. I was scared, and then I was old, and then I just had a dog and a box of dead boys' things in my closet, and I couldn't look at any of it." His voice shook. "It's still here. Copies of everything he wrote down he made." He was smarter than they ever knew. Marcus closed his eyes. 19 years. The proof had been sitting in a closet in a VA home for 19 years, kept by a frightened old man who could not throw it away and could not pass it on, the way Ranger had been kept, the way the truth itself had been kept by people too broken by it to act, and too decent to destroy it. "Mr. Briggs," Marcus said, "I'm going to send someone you can trust, and then I think you should come to Kentucky. There's a woman here who would like to thank the man who kept her son's dog alive." The envelope came north, in the careful hands of Deputy Cole's office, logged and sealed and handled the way evidence must be handled if it is going to mean anything. Inside were copies in Daniel's own hand, his neat block printing that Eleanor knew on sight, columns of figures and dates and the names of men, and one folded page that was not a record at all. It was a letter. It was addressed to his mother. Eleanor read it alone, in Daniel's old room, with Ranger on the floor beside her and the door shut. She never told anyone everything it said. But she came out an hour later with her eyes red and her back straight, and she handed Marcus the parts that were not only hers, the parts that named what Daniel had found and what he feared and what he meant to do about it. At the bottom, above his name, her son had written a line that Eleanor did read aloud once to the people gathered in her kitchen because she said they had earned the right to hear it. "If they stop me," he had written, "it will be because I was doing the right thing. Tell my mother I was doing the right thing." No one spoke for a while after that. Carla Mendez had her hand over her mouth. Pastor Ferris had his head bowed. Dwight Pruitt was looking very hard at the floor. And Ranger rose and went to Eleanor and pressed his head against her, and the old woman put her hand in his fur, and the kitchen full of people understood that they were no longer just neighbors helping a neighbor. They were the answer to a 19-year-old request. They were the ones who had been asked to tell his mother. The end of it was not a fight. Marcus had promised himself it would not be, because his whole life had taught him that the loud, satisfying endings were usually the false ones, and the real justice came quiet and slow and on paper. He kept that promise. Royce Tillman was not arrested at his lake house in a blaze of lights. It happened in offices over weeks, the way the truly serious reckonings happen. The financial case came first and fastest because 4 families with documented losses and a deputy who would not let go made a pattern the state could not ignore, and Sumter Ridge Holdings found its lending practices under a kind of scrutiny that money could slow but not stop. The lien against Eleanor's house was found to be built on fraudulent terms and was voided, and her home was hers again, free and clear as it had always rightfully been. The Hadley's case was reopened. So was the Combs. So were others. As more families came forward once it was clear that coming forward was safe, that the perfectly legal thing had a crack in it after all, and the crack had been opened by an old woman who would not sell. The matter of Daniel Voss took longer, as Marcus had known it would. But the copies in Daniel's hand, paired with Samuel Okafor's recorded account and the old quartermaster's testimony, were enough to open a federal inquiry into the death of a Marine that had been closed for 19 years on the strength of a clean story. Marcus did not pretend to Eleanor that it would be fast or that it would end with the satisfying clang of a cell door. He told her the truth, which was that the work would outlast both of them, perhaps, but that it was moving now and could not be stopped, and that her son's name was being said in rooms where it should have been said 2 decades ago, no longer as a man who died in a wreck. Royce Tillman, for his part, did what men like him do. As the ground shifted under him, he grew smaller and quieter, his church friends and his good name falling away one by one, his company carved up by the lawyers who had once protected it. He never stood in a Kentucky courtroom and looked Eleanor Voss in the eye. Men like him rarely do. The systemic thing that made him was larger than him, and it closed over him without ceremony, and Eleanor found that she did not need to watch him fall. She had never wanted his ruin. She had wanted her son's name. That she was getting. On a clear morning in early autumn, an old man named Briggs came to Kentucky. After all, he came on a bus with a cane in a small bag, and Marcus drove out to meet him. And when the old quartermaster saw Ranger waiting at the gray house, he sat down right there on the porch steps and wept into the dog's neck. And Ranger stood and let him the way the dog let everyone who needed it. Eleanor came out and stood over the old man, who had kept her son's dog and her son's truth for 19 frightened years, and she did not have it in her to be angry at him. She put her hand on his shoulder. "You kept him," she said. "You kept Ranger alive, and you kept the envelope when it would have been easier to lose both. You didn't fail, my son. You waited for the right person to come. And he came." Briggs looked up at her, and whatever he had carried into that yard he set down there on the porch steps in the autumn light. The house filled up that season in a way it had not since Daniel was a boy. Carla brought food. Dwight fixed the sagging porch rail he had been eyeing for years. Becca Hadley came by with her grandfather, whose own land was being returned, and the two families sat on Eleanor's porch and did not talk much because they did not need to. Pastor Ferris held a small service, not a funeral exactly, because there were no remains to bury and never would be, but a gathering, a setting rite, in which the county finally said aloud what the telegram had lied about. Eleanor stood and read the line from her son's letter, the part she let the world hear, and the gray house that had held one woman's grief, for 19 years held, for an afternoon, an entire community's reckoning with the truth. Marcus stayed. He had not planned to. He had come to deliver a truth and leave, the way he had spent his whole life, arriving and leaving, never staying long enough in any place to be missed when he was gone. But the leaving did not come. There was the porch rail, and then the roof, and then the back fence, and there was Eleanor, who needed less help than she pretended, and offered it anyway, because she had seen that this man needed somewhere to put his hands and his loyalty. There was Ranger, who had chosen this house the first wet night, and would not be moved. And there was the slow discovery, surprising to no one but Marcus, that the thing he had been looking for in all his arriving and leaving was a place that would not let him go. "You don't have to keep finding reasons to stay," Eleanor told him one evening, watching him pretend to inspect a gutter that was perfectly fine. "You can just stay." Marcus came down off the ladder. For a long moment he did not say anything, the words backing up the way they had that first night in the rain. Then he looked at the old woman who had lost everything and refused to be made small by it, and at the dog lying in the last warm patch of sun on the porch boards, and he found that the thing he wanted to say was very simple after all. "All right," he said. "I'll stay." And he did. The federal inquiry ground on through the winter and into the next year, and there were depositions and findings and a slow official acknowledgment that a Marine named Daniel Voss had not died in any accident. Eleanor lived to see his record corrected. She lived to receive a second flag, the right one, this time folded by hands that knew what it meant, and she set it in the glass case on the mantel beside the first. And she kept both, because both were true now in their way. The first was the lie she had been handed. The second was the truth a stranger and a dog had carried to her door through the rain. She kept them side by side so she would never forget that the truth can be buried and traveled over and built upon for 19 years or for 100, and still if even one person refuses to let it stay buried, it will find its way home. Ranger lived 3 more years. Good years, fat and gray-muzzled and slow, sleeping in the sun and keeping the door out of habit long after there was anything to keep it from. When he went in his sleep on the porch boards, he had claimed, with Eleanor's hand on his back and Marcus sitting beside him, and they buried him under the oak where Daniel used to climb. And it felt less like an ending than like a soldier finally allowed to stand down. Eleanor Voss died at 86 in her own house, on her own land, with people around her who loved her. She had gotten her son's name back. She had kept her home. She had been told a lie for 19 years and had lived long enough to replace it with the truth. And she had done it, not with anger, but with a stubbornness that looked, in the end, a great deal like faith. If you are still here, listen. There is a particular kind of cruelty in being told a comfortable lie about someone you love, and a particular kind of courage in refusing to let that lie be the last word. Most of us will never face a Royce Tillman, or hold a folded flag, or open a door in the rain to a stranger bearing the truth. But most of us know what it is to carry something we are afraid to look at, to keep an envelope in a closet because passing it on costs more than we think we have. The story of Eleanor Voss is a reminder that the truth waits patiently for the person brave enough to carry it the last mile, and that no act of keeping faith, however small, however delayed, is ever wasted. The old quartermaster kept a dog and an envelope. A dying man spoke a name. A Marine drove through the rain. The mother, who never stopped waiting, finally heard the words she had earned. May God bless you and keep you. May He guard the people you love and give you the courage to carry your own hard truths the last mile home. And may you never forget that being told someone did not make it home is not always the end of the story. Sometimes it is only the night before. The knock at the door,